Hey everybody, what is going on? Hexlex here with another Master Duel video for you guys. So today we're going to be taking a look at Swordsoul Tenyi. Specifically, I am doing a post-ban list build, which is kind of funny because, like, I don't think I've really had much of an opportunity to come back to this deck just yet, since, you know, the release of the Sinister Sovereign here, but honestly, we're like already at the point where like, okay, now we have to update the deck again for another ban list, which again, I will not complain about this influx of new content and also ban list updates, that's for sure, but of course, with Halki Fibrax being banned, that has definitely changed the scope of how this deck is going to be played, right? So, you know, obviously we've taken the Halk and Rorodon engine out of the extra deck. I haven't put too much thought into what else I might want to include in the extra deck. For the time being, I'm playing a third Monk of the Tenyi, just because this card is so important to Swordsoul Tenyi in particular. If you've been playing Adventure Tenyi for a while, because this kind of happened with me, where, like, you know, in Adventure Tenyi, like, we play the Monk of the extra deck, but it's obviously not really, like, that important to the strategy. It's just kind of, like, fringe in case you want to, like, bounce something with Vishuda or something, or sometimes it might enable a weird play in that deck that it might not normally, but in Swordsoul Tenyi, Monk of the Tenyi actually does tend to be a pretty crucial part of specifically our Tenyi engine, as in order to, you know, use any of our Tenyi effects, we need to have a non-effect monster on the field, and Monk of the Tenyi is obviously the best and easiest way to get that non-effect monster, aside from, like, making a Swordsoul token or something like that. So, it is a very important card to have, and there are times when two aren't enough. I've had games playing this deck where I go through both of my monks, and I'm like, I actually still would like another monk to make more plays. So just for those, like, long drawn out games, I do think a third Monk of the Tenyi is probably just going to be one of the best bets no matter what. I'm kind of more, not struggling, that's not the right word, but kind of more going back and forth on what other synchro monster I kind of want to use, or what other extra monster I want to use. And right now I've just landed back on Adamancipator Risen Dragite. Oh, it's been so long since I've played this deck, I can't even say the archetype's name anymore. But yes, Adamancipator Risen Dragite I've kind of come back to as one of my go-to level 8 synchros for this deck. Of course, we've got Swordsoul of Mo Ye and Shthana as well, but mostly Swordsoul of Mo Ye to count as a water for Adamancipator Risen Dragite. This card is also pretty good to have in the extra deck, particularly against the Eldritch matchup, which, you know, going first, obviously you won't really have a way of knowing that you're playing against Eldritch to make this, but that doesn't mean it's still not useful later in the game. I've had games against Eldritch where, you know, I'm able to make a Dragite, and that's able to kind of carry me through the rest of the game, as I'm able to stop my opponent's, like, continuous stream of you know, Eldritch spells and trap cards from coming down by negating them just kind of once per turn with Dragite here. You can, even if they go to banish during the end phase, you can negate that effect with Dragite's negation as well. So that's pretty nice against Eldritch there, which does tend to be one of our more difficult matchups. And even though Eldritch wasn't really represented on the latest tier list that we saw, that of course is for tournaments, and of course does not mean that it is not being used on the ranked ladder as well. So you tend to see, especially around this time of the season, this time being like very late into the season, you tend to see on ladder a lot of decks like Eldritch, like Numeron, like Flaunderies, because of multiple reasons actually. One, they're, you know, tend to be a little bit easier to pilot, so they're kind of good go-to competitive decks. Two, they tend to be a little less ultra rare intensive. That's not always the case, like Flaunderies if you want to play like Dimension Shifters or something, but other than that, actually Flaunderies is very cheap to build. Eldritch is actually a little bit more expensive nowadays, ever since, I mean, this was a while ago, but ever since Lord of the Heavenly Prison came out. That is another 3 ultra rares that you need to build, or you need to include for the build there. And then Numeron, of course, if you can make 3 Numeron networks and already have staples, you can build Numeron. So, of course, also those decks, and I think this is also, honestly, I do think this is a small factor, not like a huge one necessarily, but a small one, but like decks that have a reputation like that do tend to get played sometimes because they have that reputation. Like, how many times have you, even like while you're waking up and like, oh my god, it's Eldritch, they set 5, you just kind of like don't feel like dealing with it and just surrender? Honestly, some people who are playing Eldritch are kind of banking on that fact that you'll do that. So that's also why I say, like, you know, ideally never surrender. Of course, if you're like about to lose, or you see your opponent's got like an inevitable combo, like there are plenty of times where I'll surrender even though my opponent hasn't played the combo yet, but I see that they have the pieces for lethal, just because, like, I don't know, especially at like Diamond. I mean, you can't always assume your opponent's gonna know what they're doing, but sometimes you just have to, value your time a little bit more. So I guess that's my advice there, of like when to surrender versus not in those kind of scenarios. It's like, really, how much do you value your time, honestly? That said, you know, it's very plausible, not even just possible, but plausible for the opponent to, like, screw a combo up. Even people who've done it a million times. Yeah, me, I screw combos up all the time just because, like, even though it's a combo I know and I'm just not thinking. So that's another thing I do like to advocate for, though, is, like, allowing your opponent the opportunity to misplay. And you know, by not surrendering and continuing or allowing the game to draw out, like, you know, you allow that opportunity to happen, and then you can come back and win. So that's always nice when that happens. In any case, though, I'm getting into a tangent now, so let's go ahead and break this list down card by card, and then we will go ahead and go into some gameplay. So for this post-ban list build, we are playing... Oh, actually, you know what? Let me talk about the differences real quick before I go into the actual list themselves. I already talked about the extra deck again. We obviously dropped Hulk and Rorodon. I've included a third Monk and Dragite for the time being. That it might be subject to change, but I do think these are pretty good substitutions. As far as the main deck goes, we had to take out the Deskbot, was actually really the only thing we had to drop, so I decided to include a Veiler instead. I thought about including a third Imperm, but I like having the Veiler. I really like 1 Veiler, 2 Imperm over 3 Imperm, specifically because of Crossout Designator, but also even in like synchro-based decks, like having the level 1 tuner is not completely irrelevant. Like, there are times where you can potentially, you know, I'm just thinking of a case where you might special summon the Longyuan and try to summon the token, but then the opponent like blows up the token or something, and then you can just normal summon the Veiler and then go into a Yazi, right? Like, that's just one example of how having access to the tuner is good. Or more commonly, it's probably gonna be like special Ashuna, normal Veiler, and then go for a level 8, right? So just having the option, you know. I do like consistency as opposed to variety most of the time, but this is still variety within consistency, right? Because we're still getting 3 monster effect negates. It's just, you know, we're spreading it out a little bit as opposed to, again, to 3 Imperm, 1 Veiler, 2 Imperm instead. But that's the only change I've made to the main deck. That's the only change I really feel the need to make moving forward. I did slightly consider taking out a Feather Duster in favor of an Imperm. But again, I just because I was, you know, up till this point, I'd been seeing a lot more branded Despia, of course, than Eldritch. But honestly, this like last play session, I just played a bunch of games. I didn't see any branded Despia at all. I did see multiple Eldritches though, so definitely glad I left that Feather Duster in. Always important to have, I think, for best of 1 format. But in any case, okay, now let's go ahead and break down the list card by card here. So we're playing 1 Effect Veiler, 3 Tenyi Spirit Adhara, 3 Maxx, 3 Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, 1 Tenyi Spirit Shthana, 3 Swordsoul of Mo Ye, 2 Swordsoul of Taia, 2 Incredible Ecclesia, the Virtuous, 3 Swordsoul Strategist Longyuan, 2 Tenyi Spirit Vishuda, 3 Tenyi Spirit Ashuna, 1 Nibiru the Primal Being, 1 Archnemesis Protos, 1 Harpie's Feather Duster, 3 Swordsoul Emergence, 2 Called by the Grave, 1 Crossout Designator, 2 Heavenly Dragon Circle, 2 Infinite Impermanence, and then 1 Swordsoul Blackout. Extra deck will have 1 Yazi, Evil of the Yang, 2 Baxia, Brightness of the Yang, 1 Draco Berserker of the Tenyi, 1 Adamancipator Risen Dragite, 2 Swordsoul Grandmaster Chi Xiao, 1 Chao Feng, Phantom of the Yang, 1 Baronne de Fluer, 1 Swordsoul Supreme Sovereign Cheng Ying, 1 Swordsoul Sinister Sovereign Qi Xing Longyuan, 3 Monk of the Tenyi, and then finally 1 Shaman of the Tenyi. Alright, now that we have covered what is all in the build, let's go and take a look at some gameplay. Okay, so this first game we're going to show here is going to be against a 60-card variant of Dragon Link. Particularly, it's a 60-card variant that's using the Thunder Dragon package. Because I do believe there are 60-card variants that do not use that package, but this one is in fact doing it for the easy Thunder Dragon Colossus there. So they're going to end up taking the first turn. Looking at our opening hand here, we've only got the Nibiru as our disruption, which is a little bit dicey sometimes. Like, one, obviously you're not always playing against a deck that Nibiru is necessarily good against. That's obviously not going to be the case here as we see 1-for-1 coming down. Like, most of the time 60-card decks, it's like, okay, Nibiru is probably going to get dropped, but especially if your opponent like plays like a 1-for-1, yeah, it's an easy tell that you've got a Nibiru, a bowl, say that 5 times fast, opponent. So I'm not worried about that anymore, but I do still need to be concerned about the timing of Nibiru, especially as my opponent plays a 1-for-1 and then discards the Sephiroth, right? We talked about this in a recent video about how, like, knowing what cards are played in a bunch of decks allows you to, even if you see a weird, obtuse-looking card, especially sometimes if you see a weird, obtuse-looking card, you can, like, immediately pick up on what deck your opponent's playing. So even though not all variants of Dragon Link necessarily play 1-for-1, I see them discard the Sephiroth and I'm like, okay, it's Dragon Link. So, you know, you might think, well, what does this information actually do for you at this point in the game? What it can actually do is kind of get you thinking about how you're going to use your responses, right? So now I'm thinking about this Nibiru in relation to Dragon Link, and I think to myself, okay, the thing about Dragon Link is I know they have a ton of gas, and I know that I can't just fire off Nibiru on the 5th summon. I have to specifically wait for a choke point. And this is yet another way in which knowing your opponent's decks and just knowing meta decks in general is very, very useful for identifying choke points like this. Again, some decks you can just drop Nibiru on the 5th summon and you're going to be fine. I'm thinking like Swordsoul Tenyi is kind of one of those decks. If they do their typical, like, Mo Ye into Longyuan play, then they go in the Mo Ye, the Chi Xiao, and then we do the Longyuan, the token, then you can drop the Nibiru, and then like they usually can't do much else. That is not necessarily the case with Dragon. Like they could do like a lot of their combo without even normal summoning, and then if you Nibiru at the wrong time, they can just like normal summon Rocket Tracer and keep going, right? So again, we want to make sure that we're activating at the right time here. So also another thing that I wanted to talk about, right, is during the actual game, of course, right here you have the button that says auto, off, on. This is one of those times where like you actually do want to toggle it to off in order to hold a bluff, right? Because here's the thing, right? Nibiru is the only piece of disruption in my hand. If suddenly my opponent summons a 5th monster and suddenly I'm getting a prompt to respond, that's a very obvious tell that I've got Nibiru, because I haven't been given a prompt to respond up to this point. So this is one of those games where I would change this from auto to off at this point. Now you do want to be careful about this, because of course that means you won't be given any prompts to respond at all. So you need to and what I'll do is I'll have my cursor over it waiting to click it back to on, like at the moment before I want to activate Nibiru. It's important that you do it before you want to activate Nibiru, because sometimes if your opponent activates the card and you try to switch from off to on, it won't do it fast enough and you won't get the chance to respond. So you definitely want to make sure that you're being mindful of that. But it's a very, very useful thing to do, because then my opponent will continue their plays, then they're wiser, they'll think they're like home free, that I don't have any responses at all, and then they'll play straight into my Nibiru. Whereas if they see me suddenly getting prompts to respond on the 5th summon, they can, especially with this deck, very easily play around Nibiru. So in any case, let's go ahead and let the game actually play out here now. The opponent's got the Black Metal Dragon, sending it for the Striker Dragon to add both the Boot Sector Launch and of course the Red Med, the Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon. Yeah, so here, this is kind of looking like one of those games where they might not have to commit their normal summon right away, specifically because they have access to the Red Med so easily, or whether they got to it because of the Black Metal Dragon here, which they're able to get through 1-for-1. Normally they summon the Black Metal Dragon, and that would be their normal summon, but now here again they did have the 1-for-1. So I think this Romulus? No, the let's see, Black Metal Striker, Red Med, Romulus. No, the next summon is going to be the 5th summon. Whoa, I'm so sorry about that. That was one of my alarms going off. My bad. So yeah, now we're basically just kind of waiting for our opponent to... I'm basically waiting for them to use their normal summon and the Rocket Tracer at this point, which we're actually going to do in one fell swoop right here, as they normal the Rocket Tracer and then pop the Ravine. It was kind of actually really good timing of when I said that, because yeah, those were actually the two things that I was waiting for my opponent to do here, right? Again, the normal summon I want them to use because it's going to be much harder for them to make plays moving forward after they've used their normal summon. Same with the especially true of the Rocket Tracer, especially true of the Rocket Tracer. The Rocket Tracer isn't always like the main way for them to combo off, but the effect is obviously very, very good. So I also want to make sure that I'm doing it at a point where they can't necessarily synchro summon right now, but if your opponent's got the materials to make like in this example, or against this deck, or just even in general, if your opponent's got the materials to make like a level 10 synchro, or they have the materials to make a level 8 synchro, and then also have like a link monster in the graveyard, you just want to be mindful of when they're setting up for plays that will allow them to go into an Omni Negate to stop your Nibiru. If you notice that happening and they've got the materials on board, you pretty much have to Nibiru at that point, regardless of if you think they can keep going or not. Here, I'll just go ahead and drop Nibiru again, even though they don't necessarily have those materials like I mentioned. I don't want them to link away, into something potentially, so I'm just going to go ahead and use the Nibiru now, get rid of all their stuff, and then that way they'll be much more difficult, or they'll much be more hard-pressed to make plays moving forward. Now, because my opponent's playing the Thunder Dragon engine and they had the Gold Sark, they actually are able to make more plays here, so I didn't really account for that. I probably should have, to be fair, but also, like, it's still kind of a niche thing to play around. Like, again, not even every 60 card variant of Dragon Link is necessarily the Thunder Dragon variant, so I think it's still a fine time to Nibiru when we did. It was also a good time to Nibiru because I knew it would give my opponent's Nibiru really low defense. You want to be mindful of the stats that you're giving your opponent's Nibiru. You want to make sure you're able to out the token, basically. That's always like the most important thing. So, yeah, here I can go ahead and set up the Monk, of course, with the Vishuda to go ahead and bounce that Thunder Dragon Colossus away. doing that with the Adhara basically in the normal summon. Then I can use the Heavenly Dragon Circle. Now, what I should have actually done here was add the Longyuan, and then I could have discarded the Vishuda, so the Longyuan, use that effect to blow up the token, battle, done 3000, had an Omni Negate up, would have been in a much better position than if I just added Mo Ye, but it was actually just a straight up misplay on my part. Like, Heavenly Dragon Circle, I always forget that you negate the effect of the thing you special summon, right? So there have been more times than I care to admit where I'll special summon Mo Ye or Taia off of this, and I'll be like, oh, wait, it's negated, so I can't actually keep comboing. So here I actually had that brain fart, but kind of caught it halfway through. I selected Mo Ye, like, I picked it, and then I realized, oh, I can't summon this, because then I got the prompt of asking, do you want to special summon it, yes or no? Then I realized, oh, I can't special summon this Mo Ye because I won't get the effect. So, but then at that point, it's too late to back out and go back to picking a target, so... or not a target, because you don't target cards in the deck, but to add a selection of a card to add. So at that point, I'm just like, well, I'll add the Mo Ye to my hand for next turn then. That way, at least I get some use out of it. Besides, I don't really feel the need to clear both of my opponent's monsters here. I am just going to battle over the token, and I think that should be fine. I don't think there's a whole lot that Swordsoul can do, or not Swordsoul, Dragon Link can do with just this Dragon Roar up, so I'm fine leaving it up here. Alright, opponent's got some more plays here going into a very pretty Wyvern Burster. This is actually one of the more pretty prismatics I've seen in a while. I've always liked Wyvern Burster's art, period, and Collapse Serpent, but definitely nice in that royal finish. I always say prismatic, it's royal finish. Prismatic is Runeterra, I think. I don't remember. It's all these different digital card games have all the different like rarities and gloss finish names, and they're all like similar enough. Like, of course they do that on purpose to make you think of each other's games. Whatever, anyway. Yeah, so the opponent's going to target the Rocket Tracer here again. We don't want this to come down. One, because it's obviously a very good card and very important to their strategy. Two, it's a tuner where they currently don't have access to any, so I definitely don't want them to be able to go into their synchros. It's Dragon Link. Let's try to keep them confined to the links, right? Here the opponent actually manages to do something really scary and unique, carry out a Dragon Buster Destruction Sword, which I definitely was not expecting, but is going to be dropped all the same. It's actually not that big of a deal, though, not nearly as big a one as it looks like, because I can just summon Mo Ye, reveal the Vishuda, get the token, banish the Vishuda from my hand, bounce the Dragon Dark, and then that'll, you know, obviously take care of that nuisance, and I'll be able to summon from the extra deck. So, and it's the fact that I drew an Ashuna is just icing on the cake, and will cinch the fact that I have lethal. So, even though my opponent, even if my opponent hadn't conceded here, rather, I definitely just had like a guaranteed lethal at this point. So, yeah, that was a good game against Dragon Link there. Wanted to show that game because it's just a great example of how to use disruption, but particularly Nibiru in this example. So, all right, let's go ahead and go into the next game. Okay, so this game here is going to be against the Mirror Match, which is definitely not bad testing here. I actually don't remember if they were playing. I should have looked, because this was, I think this was the last game I played, actually, so I just remember that it's the Mirror Match, but I should have looked to see if they were playing the Halkarorodon engine, because it's funny seeing how many people like myself are already, like, not playing the engine, even though it's still technically legal, just to get the testing in. It's a really interesting phenomenon that you would only see on Master Duel, and obviously not in like a TCG or OCG setting, because, you know, you would only see results like data, like metadata from tournaments, and obviously for one isolated event for a tournament, you're going to want to play fully optimally under the ban list for that one event. But, you know, when you have Master Duel Ranked Ladder, which is just kind of this like continuous ongoing thing, it's, you know, easier to get into the mindset of like, oh, let's just go ahead and test for the new format now. Which is, I don't know, it's interesting. It's a very interesting psychological effect, because, like, technically, if I wanted to play optimally, like, yeah, I would still be playing Halkarorodon right now, but, that is not the case, so, yeah, I don't know, it's just an interesting, like, thought I had just now about how people tend to, play and test for formats, and just one of the many differences between Master Duel and the, you know, TCG, paper Yu-Gi-Oh, basically. Anyway, here, so, yeah, the opponent's got an Ashuna. By the way, is our opening setup, like, not just, like, the Stone Cold Nuts? Like, we have our typical G-Shao plus Baron, plus 2 Call Buys, plus Ash and Maxx, and then we even drew a Valor off of our first Maxx draw, so, oh yeah, we definitely love to see it here. Good at Ash at Desires, while I just get more advantage off of my opponent's summons here. I am going to preemptively Call Buy this Ashuna out of the graveyard. Because I've got 2 Call Buys, I'm totally fine doing this here. The opponent does have Vishuda though, so I'm going to have to use the Baron. Not ideal way to use the Baron, but at this point I'm thinking, like, my opponent's only got 3 cards left. I still got a lot of disruption. I should be good. And then sure enough, they just set one card and pass. Now, I am kind of thinking, like, well, if this is Blackout, that's actually pretty bad. But in any case, I'm going to go ahead and use the Baronne for the Taia, and it's Blackout. Of course, it's Blackout. So, that's pretty bad, because I don't have any other gas in my hand, and because the Baronne is not going back to the extra deck, I don't get to summon the Taia, because it's an and if you do effect. So, right, we have to send a Baronne back to the extra deck in order to be able to summon the Taia, because it says and if you do. So, at the very least, I didn't draw another Maxx. So, again, at the very least, I do have that going for me here, and these Maxx are definitely just going to be my saving grace in this game here. But honestly, so is all this disruption or drawing. Like, you know, if I'm not drawing gas, at the very least, we're getting to draw the disruption here. So, I'm a little bit anxious at this point, though, because, like, you know, I'm pretty much going to need to top deck a Taia, or a Longyuan would do it with the Blackout, in order to be able to make really any amount of significant plays here. Fortunately, I do rip the Longyuan off the top of my deck, so that's nice. I would have kind of preferred the Taia, but whatever. You know what they say about beggars and choosers, right? Of course, and then Emergence would have done as well. Basically, anything that was not Mo Ye. That was the only Swordsoul card that wouldn't have done that there, obviously because of the fact that I don't have any other Swordsoul or Worm card in my hand. So, I already made the Baronne, so I'm actually going to go for the Qixing Longyuan here. That way I can, because, you know, between the battle and the burn from the main deck Longyuan, my opponent's already going to be low enough that these effects are really going to start to stack up. Plus, between the Banishing and the Valor and Imperm, I'm pretty reasonably confident that my opponent's not going to be able to do too much, plus the fact that these last two cards haven't really been gas for them so far. So, yeah, by activating the Qixing Longyuan effect on the Harpie's Feather Duster there, we're able to put them down to 2,500, which is going to guarantee more or less that we're able to attack directly for lethal if my opponent isn't able to make any significant plays with their last two cards, which, as we just discussed, we knew they were not able to do. So, yeah, another nice game there, one where we got to use the new boss monster to finish them off. So, alright, let's go and take a look at the next game. Alright, this game is going to be quite a bit of a longer one. Not too long, but it's going to be against Eldritch here. Which, as I mentioned before, is definitely this deck's, I think, this deck's worst matchup. This deck just has a hard time pushing through a lot of floodgates. Like, Goes In really hurts the deck, Rivalry really hurts the deck, Summon Limit really hurts the deck, Skill Drain... Yeah, Skill Drain really hurts the deck. Well, yeah, of course it does. It's just like every one of Eldritch's floodgates. There can only be one. Doesn't actually hurt it that much. You can play with only worms, but you still can't make, like, Baronne and some other stuff. But that's about the only one, and that's, like, one of the lesser used ones, right? Probably because of Swordsoul, among other decks, not really being as hampered by it. But, yeah, opponent's got 3 face downs and 3 back rows and a face down monster as well. Only open with the ability to make a level 10 with the Longyuan here, so of course I went for Baronne. And I'm going to kind of rely pretty heavily on this Baronne to kind of carry me through this game and through these back rows, right? Popping the face down monster to try to get some damage in. It was Albaz, so I was initially thinking, oh, maybe it's just a Baronne de Fluer that had a really weird opening hand, but no, of course the Huaquero definitely gives them away as the Eldritch variant of, well, yeah, the Branded Despia variant of Eldritch, I should say, as opposed to the Eldritch variant of Branded Despia, because it's definitely more of an Eldritch-based deck. So yeah, you know, I've still got my Baronne's Omni Negate at this point, but I do definitely need to be really careful about how I use it. You also need to be mindful in scenarios like this of, like, where your opponent is setting the cards. Now, they're kind of mixing up cards they've set previously and cards they're set on previous turns, and also setting cards that they've searched. We want to make sure that we're being extra mindful of the cards that we're rolling up with Baronne at this point. So the best way to check for that, and is not obvious at all, by the way, but when your opponent sets cards here in the you know, this little information screen here, if you look here very carefully, it actually does show you which column they set it in. Which I didn't think they did for the longest time, and I remember being really frustrated by that, because, like, that's actually really important information to know. Again, in scenarios like this where they've got face down cards that are previously established, face down cards that they've set, like, organically from their hand, and face down cards that they've set off the effect of a card that they've searched, you need to be able to know, or at least, you know, having the ability to remember, like, which is which. So, yeah, you want to be mindful for this little icon right here. So we know that or I guess they searched both of these, so it doesn't really apply what I said before, but you know what I mean. So now we know that this one specifically is the Conquistador, and this one specifically is the Huaquero, because we can see the little icons that are marked off there. So it took me forever to notice that. I think I only noticed that like a month or two ago after playing Master Duel this whole time. So I definitely wanted to make sure to stop and point that out, because that's important information. That's very important information. I mean, you know, back when I used to play like IRL, I've had games in like regionals where I've won because my opponent will duality. I just remember one game in particular where my opponent activated duality, revealed 3 cards, including a Solemn Warning, added the warning to his hand, didn't like mix up the cards in his hand at all afterwards, and then just set 3. And I had an MST in my hand, so I was like, okay, I'll MST the far left one, which I knew was Solemn Warning, and then I hit it, and then I was able to combo off and win it. And I remember my opponent even made a comment about how lucky I got with my MST hit, and I just wanted to say I didn't, but I wanted to say it so badly, like, it's not my fault you didn't mix up your hand. Again, that's just the kind of information that, like, seems really, really, really minor, but is very, very, very important. Very important. Like here, this was a scenario, because you see I blew up the Rivalry of the Warlord specifically. Again, that's because my opponent just set this card. I knew it was a Huaquero. My opponent hasn't been using either of these cards, so I don't really think they're anything too dangerous or too live necessarily. And then this was kind of like the wild card, right? This was the card I didn't know much about. They just kind of set it from their hand. So that's the one I decided to pop because I had the least information on it and I felt the most threatened by it as a result. And then, of course, again, it ended up being the Rivalry of the Warlords, which obviously against this deck is a huge, huge hurdle to have to climb. So I'm going to go for the Mo Ye here. Opponent does have a Solemn Judgment, though, so that is a bit of a yikes. Yeah, I'm going to go for the direct attack, but I know that they have the Scarlet Sanguine, and now I'm in a little bit of a bind. And now I'm in a little bit of a way where I'm having a harder time dealing with this. Also, huge misplay on my part. I should not have just, like, clicked... I just clicked replay, you know, continue attack, because that's what you're kind of used to doing. But I should not have actually destroyed this Eldritch, because now it can come back with 3,500 attack and run over my Baron. If I left it on the board, that might not necessarily have been the case. It might have had, well, they did have the Golden Elderland to have access to another Eldritch, so to be fair, they would have had plays either way, but I don't really gain too much by running over this Eldritch here. So I do think I probably shouldn't have battled it. I think that's the case here. But of course, you know, again, they have the Cursed Eldland, and they search for another Scarlet Sanguine, so it's not looking super likely that would have made the difference anyway, but all the same, it would have prevented this Eldritch from coming down to 3,500 attack like it is right now, right? So there is that. Well, you know, actually, I think it would have, because that Scarlet Sanguine wouldn't have, you know, it would have pulled an Eldritch, but it would have had regular stats. So it actually, yeah, it was definitely a misplay not to, or rather, it was definitely a misplay to battle over the Eldritch there. So I don't know that necessarily that is like what is going to cause my defeat here, because it's, you know, you can see my hand, it's already not looking good for me here, but yeah, and then as my opponent flips up the summon limit, like I pretty much know it's over at this point. And I actually misplayed here too. I could have flipped this Imperm to negate this Huaquero, but at this stage it didn't super duper matter, right? Like, well, actually it kind of did, because they banished a Vishuda, and I could have bounced the summon limit, and I could have... Actually, that definitely super mattered, because then I could have... Well, no, then I couldn't have banished the Adhara. I was going to say I could have gone into a Cheng Ying and then banished the Adhara, but then I wouldn't have had a normal monster, so I couldn't have done that. I guess, to be fair, my opponent did also have the Golden Land, so they would have been able to stop the Vishuda anyway, but... Nah, you know, that is, again, even though my opponent did have answers and outs, regardless, doesn't change the fact that it wasn't the right play. You know, and that's not to say you should, like, beat yourself up for it in scenarios like that, but it is just something to be mindful of. Like, you know, if you misplay and the game happens to work out and you win anyway, you should still acknowledge the fact that you misplay and try not to do it again in the future, because you know, just having the opposite mentality just kind of is, you know, just going to cause you to misplay more. You know, thinking you're infallible or whatever. Always nice to be kind of humbled in that regard, to make sure that we're, again, just remembering our own misplays even when we win. Even though we didn't in this case. We very much got wrecked as our opponent summons a Baldarok and then flips over a Spell Fragrance. Like, we were already done under the summon limit, but we were extra done under this point. So, GG's against Hajime there. We do have one more game to look at. Let's go ahead and jump straight into it. Alright, last duel of the video here is going to be another one against Dragon Link. This one's not a 60 card variant. This one's one of the kind of slim variants. This one's actually 42 cards, which is... interesting. I should have looked over the build a little bit more carefully, because I had a hard time feeling like I could even get down to 45, honestly. And I knew I wanted to be at 45 or less for my build, but yeah, I had a hard time just getting down to 45, honestly. Plus, I think, were they playing... Okay, no, I thought that was the Starliege Sephret. I was going to say, I'm playing 45 cards. I didn't have room for Starliege Sephret, which I did kind of want to play, so... yeah, in any case here, I'm going to drop the Maxi. I should drop the Maxi, actually, you know... what I really should have done was, again, this toggle here, I should have flipped it from auto to on, and then after the Chaos Space added the Wyver Burster, upon resolution of that, I should have activated Maxx, because of course they were going to summon the Wyver Burster, so technically I did miss out on one draw here, but we're going to Maxx, of course, as soon as the Wyver Burster is summoned. That way we can make sure we get a draw in case they, like, because they could very easily just link it away for Striker Dragon, but here they're going to go for the level 8 Synchro instead, which kind of makes more sense if they want to do minimal special summons. I'm actually really glad I got the Maxx off here, because like those reveals off of that Chaos Ruler were already insane right there. So yeah, the combo potential my opponent had I not played Maxx is definitely more than a bit intimidating in this case. And they actually are going to go into their adventure engine a bit, which makes sense because they have a decent amount of advantage. So it kind of, again, makes sense that they don't mind giving me a little bit here in order to gain access to their Griffin Rider. Of course, holding the Griffin Rider for the next turn, so that way they can special summon it without giving me another draw under Maxx. But my hand's looking fantastic here. I'm going to lead with the Vishuda to summon it from my hand. Of course, the opponent's going to Griffin Rider as soon as they have the opportunity to. And they'll also throw down a Maxx, which I kind of figured they had, given that they discarded Maxx off of Fateful Adventure on their turn, but I'm not really too fussed about it. Because really my plan here is to just go into a Monk, bounce this Griffin Rider, and then once that's addressed, I'll go into Baron. And then honestly, if I can have a Baron or it's just some kind of Omni Negate going into a combo, I don't mind comboing under Maxx at all, because at that point I kind of figure, like, what's the worst they're going to do in Nibiru? I can just negate it. There is also the factor that they could, like, Ash Blossom later in the turn, and oh, excuse me, I might have to make a decision in that regards as far as, like, do I want to stop? Do I want to use the negate on the Ash? Do I want to hold the negate? Because the opponent could very easily Ash Blossom, and then all of a sudden Nibiru during the same main phase. So even if I don't give them any more additional draws, so that is definitely something to be mindful of. And I brought that example up specifically because I am going to encounter that here. As I'm thinking to myself, with the Chi Shao, if I let that resolve, then rather if I let the Ash resolve and don't get the search off the Chi Shao, then I won't be able to finish my opponent off, and they'll go into their turn with a bunch of cards in hand. Whereas if I negate it with the Baron, yes, I run the risk of getting Nibiru'd, but at the same time, I'm still able to, then win this turn as I go for the Baxia. And of course, having to use the Baron's Destruction, because fusing the Mo Ye and the token, you only get one spin back to the deck off of Baxia, and then the opponent concedes. So yeah, it didn't end up being a risk that was worth taking, and that definitely seemed to be the case even, just moving forward in the moment. Sometimes, sometimes I admit I do get a little bit intimidated in scenarios like that, and I just kind of tend to take the quote-unquote safe route, which would have been, not letting, or just letting the Ash resolve and holding the Baron for a potential Nibiru. But you just have to factor out pros and cons, right? The cons of if I negated the Ash were the opponent has Nibiru, and then they just have a bunch of cards going into their turn. The cons if I did not negate the Ash were that my opponent would then, I wouldn't be able to win this turn, and then my opponent would get another turn in which they have a bunch of cards. So obviously when you look at it that way, it becomes much easier to make the decision to just negate the Ash Blossom there. But all right, that is it for the games for this video. Let's go ahead and move now to the outro. Okay, everybody, thank you for watching all the way to the very end of the video. I do greatly appreciate that, as well as I greatly appreciate those of you who are commenting and subscribing. Comments, definitely, as always, as ever, looking for you to give your input on both gameplay and deck building. Specifically, I'm curious as to what you are making changes to the build as far as like post-banless stuff goes. Are there any texts you might think might be important moving forward, depending on how the format's going to shift? Yeah, what do you think of Swordsoul Tenyi overall moving into the new format? I still like it a lot. The two lists that we've seen recently on Master Duel meta, even though, again, all these, Hulk is still legal and Water Enchantress is still at 2, I think is still fairly representative of what we're going to see moving forward post-banless. So in that regard, I do expect to see Swordsoul Tenyi still sticking around lower tier 1, maybe upper tier 2, but basically second best probably to Branded Despia. So yeah, that's about all I've got for this one, I think. So that is going to do it for today. Without further ado, this is Xlex signing out. Hope you guys have a fantastic day.